You know, for as long as we've reached for the stars, we've also been leaving a mess behind us. So today, we're going to talk about one of the biggest and fastest growing challenges of the entire space age, orbital debris, or as most of us call it, space junk.
All right, let's dive right in. To really get your head around this problem, you first have to understand just how insanely crowded it's become up there in Earth's orbit. The numbers, they're truly mind-boggling.
So check this out. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, that's the number of active satellites zipping around our planet right now. And the key word there is active. This doesn't even touch the thousands of dead satellites, old rocket parts, and literally millions of tiny fragments that are also circling above our heads.
And this chart, well, it paints a really clear picture of who the major players are. You can see the United States operates the vast majority of these active satellites. But China, Russia, and a whole bunch of other countries and private companies are all adding to this traffic jam in the sky.
Now, here's where things get really interesting and kind of scary. For years, scientists have been warning us that we were getting closer and closer to a critical threshold, a point of no return where the problem basically starts feeding on itself. It's a terrifying idea called the Kessler syndrome. This was the big warning shot. NASA's own models were predicting that we had so much junk up there that even if we stopped launching rockets tomorrow, things would just start crashing into each other, creating even more junk in a runaway chain reaction. That's the Kessler syndrome in a nutshell.
And then, well, the theory became a reality. In 2007, a Chinese anti-satellite test created thousands of new pieces of debris. Then, just 2 years later, a dead Russian satellite accidentally slammed into a working Iridium communications satellite. Get this, those two events alone increased the amount of trackable debris by almost a third. The tipping point wasn't a theory anymore. We'd crossed it.
So what does all this mean for the astronauts and the incredibly expensive satellites we have in space right now? Well, to put it simply, it means they're constantly dodging bullets. For the International Space Station, this has just become the new normal. I mean, this station is traveling at over 17,000 miles per hour, and it regularly has to fire its engines just to get out of the way of some oncoming piece of junk. This isn't speculation. NASA reports on it all the time. And look, this isn't a rare thing. Avoiding these potential collisions is now a routine and absolutely critical part of keeping the station and its crew safe. Because even a tiny piece of debris, say the size of a marble, can hit with the force of a bowling ball at those speeds. Sometimes a piece of junk is spotted so late that there's no time for the station to move. And in those cases, things get really serious. The astronauts are ordered to shelter inside their return capsules, basically using them as lifeboats in case the station takes a catastrophic hit. So this leads us to the most obvious question, right? If it's such a mess up there, why don't we just clean it up? Well, the answer, just like space itself, is incredibly complex. The idea does have a name, active debris removal, or ADR. The concept is super straightforward. You go up there and you grab the trash. But actually doing it, that means navigating a total minefield of technological, financial, and even political challenges. And even if we could, NASA studies show we'd face a huge strategic choice. Do we go after the millions of small but still deadly pieces of debris to protect the billion-dollar satellites we rely on right now? Or do we go after the big fish, the handful of massive, old satellites and rocket bodies that pose the greatest risk of creating massive clouds of new debris if they collide? And that brings us to the real kicker. With all this technology being developed and all these strategies being debated, who's actually responsible for doing any of this? On paper, the U.S. government's position is crystal clear. Official policy states that debris removal is a necessary long-term goal to make sure space stays safe and usable for everyone. And yet, here's the massive paradox. That's a direct quote from NASA's own Orbital Debris Office. So despite the official policy saying we should do this, no single agency has actually been given the authority or the money or the direct order to do it. It's basically a mission without a home. So the big takeaway here is this dangerous gap between knowing there's a problem and actually doing something about it. Everyone agrees space junk is a huge threat. But with no one officially in charge of the cleanup, it leaves this massive question hanging over the entire future of spaceflight. As our skies get more and more crowded, who is responsible for taking out the trash?